And we're just going to wait a few moments to allow people the opportunity to log on and join us.
Hi.
People are still logging on, so we'll wait a bit more.
Okay.
Okay, we are going to get started. Hello and welcome to Hawk Mountain Sanctuary's Autumn Lecture Series. Today's program is The American Kestrel with Dr. Allison Cornell, Professor of Biology at Penn State's Altoona College.
Hello.
Welcome, Allison. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Jamie Dawson. I'm the Director of Education at Hawk Mountain, and we are so thrilled that everyone in the audience is joining us this evening as well. As you may know, Hawk Mountain is the world's very first refuge for birds of prey, and we continue to work hard to be leaders in raptor conservation, science, and education, locally and globally around the world. Hawk Mountain is a private nonprofit, and membership is the lifeblood of our organization. To all of our members, thank you, thank you. Thank you for everything you do. We could not do what we do without you. And if you're joining us today and you're not a member, we hope that you consider becoming one in the future. Hawk Mountain hopes that everyone remains safe and healthy during these times of COVID challenges. And we are thrilled to offer our local and global community a variety of free virtual programming. As always, Hawk Mountain greatly appreciates and depends on donations. Just so everyone is aware, today's program is being recorded. The video will then be accessible on Hawk Mountain's YouTube channel as a continued resource. We also have a link on our website directly connecting you to our YouTube channel. At any point during today's program, viewers may submit their questions through the Q&A feature on the Zoom platform. And we've designated some time at the end of the program to take questions from the audience. And we are absolutely thrilled that Dr. Allison Cornell is joining us to share with us her research on the American kestrel. And before we go further, I'd like to take a moment to share some of Allison's background experience with our audience. Dr. Allison Cornell is a professor of biology at Penn State's Altoona College. She is a behavioral ecologist and has studied reproductive behaviors in songbirds, diet preferences in insects and birds, and most recently, nestling development in American kestrels. She earned her PhD in biology from Simon Fraser University in British Columbia and her BS in biology from the College of William and Mary. Allison, what inspired you to study the American kestrel?
Well, I wasn't really very interested in birds until I took a class in college called ornithology, which is the study of birds. And I took it on a whim, wasn't really that excited about it. But I was just amazed at the diverse behaviors in birds, especially their reproductive behaviors. And American kestrels are one of the best species for studying avian reproduction. And I will tell you more about why that is in the talk.
Awesome, we can't wait. So Allison, I have a memory, I think it was maybe about 2 years ago, I believe you were doing a seminar at the Copian Center, and I was lucky enough to kind of pop in on that a little bit. Can you share with us your history with Hawk Mountain?
Yeah, so I got in touch with Dr. J.F. Therrien, who's at the Hawk Mountain Sanctuary, after I finished my PhD. And I asked him if he would be interested in working together on kestrels. And he's been a fantastic collaborator and very open to letting me use the resources at Hawk Mountain Sanctuary. And all of the data that I'll talk about today really would not be possible without Hawk Mountain Sanctuary.
Oh, that's so wonderful to hear. Thank you so much. Well, we have a lot of people that are interested in the kestrel, and also Hawk Mountain Sanctuary, we took the liberty of declaring 2020 as the year of the kestrel because they're so important to study for many reasons. And Allison, I'm going to turn it over to you. We are looking forward to your presentation.
Okay. Bear with me while I set everything up on my end. Okay, so you should be able to see my slide. Is that good? Let me see it.
Looks good to me.
All right. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to listen to me talk about the American kestrel this evening. I want to tell you all about the biology of the kestrel, how researchers are studying kestrels to understand this really cool species. So first, I'll give you the sort of natural history, the life history of the American kestrel. I want to tell you a little bit about the decline that we're seeing in this species, which we really don't understand very well. So it's an exciting area for research. And we'll follow that with some of the research my lab has been doing on American kestrels with the Hawk Mountain Sanctuary. I'll focus on how we collect our data and how researchers study a bird like the kestrel, but also touch on some of our results so far. And then we'll close with some things that you can do to help kestrels and other birds. So kestrels are the smallest falcon in North America. And you can see from the map, they are widespread across both North and South America. And they can be found in Pennsylvania year round. So that's what the purple region denotes. And they are declining regionally. So I'll give you some more details on the decline in a bit. But my favorite feature about kestrels is that they breed in nest boxes. So most bird species do not build their nest in nest boxes or bird houses. The species that do, we call cavity nesters. And using nest boxes makes it very easy to track individual birds for research because you don't have to search for the nest. You can set up the nest box and the birds just come to you. So this facilitates repeated measures on birds so we can track things like growth and development of the chicks. We can also tell the exact age of the bird down to the day that they hatched by monitoring the nest box regularly. So this is my favorite feature of the kestrels. So these birds evolved to nest in natural cavities, of course, rather than man-made birdhouses. But the availability of natural cavities like holes in dead trees has decreased because what do we do when we have a dead tree on our property? It might fall over in a storm or hit a power line or a building, so we cut it down. And this doesn't just affect kestrels, but there are many other cavity nesting species like tree swallows and bluebirds that depend on those cavities for nesting sites. And cavity nesting species can't just go and build a nest the same way that a robin or some other bird can on any old tree branch. They really depend on that enclosed space to build their nest. And the other thing that I want to mention is that there's been an increase in competition for the natural cavity nests or the natural cavities for nest sites from invasive species that also use cavities. So during breeding, males will perform display flights to attract females. They'll fly up really high and then call and make kind of a show and then dive down to attract the female's attention. And I want to play you a clip of their call. You can hear them doing this throughout the breeding season. So during courtship, it's for attraction of females. And then later on, they'll use the same call when they fly into the nest box with food. So this is from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology website. I'm going to play, see if the sound will work. So that is the kestrel call that you can start listening for in late spring and summer, and they're pretty loud. So if you have a kestrel around, you'll know it if you're listening for that call. Males will also, during courtship, bring food to the female. So you can see this is a male kestrel bringing what looks like a a newt or a salamander to a female kestrel. And then he will also scout out and find a nest site and introduce the female to nest sites in the territory. The females will lay 4 to 5 eggs in the nest, and they'll incubate those eggs for about 28 days. So this is what the nest box looks like. If you look inside one during this period, you can see they don't really build the nest. They're minimalists with their nest structure. And a lot of times they'll make a little depression, like you can see with this hay, where they kind of scoot the substrate in the nest box to the side. They'll do the same thing with wood chips. If you put wood chips in a kestrel nest box, that's something they really like to lay eggs on, and they'll kind of make this little space for their eggs. So after about 28 days of incubating the eggs, the chicks will hatch, and they have some downy feathers when they hatch, but they still need mom to help keep them warm until they're about 2 weeks old. And both the male and the female will provide parental care. So they will go hunting and then bring back food for the chicks. And I have some videos of that to show you all a bit later. After about another month of after hatching, of raising the chicks, the kestrels are ready to fledge. So fledging is when chicks leave the nest. And it's kind of a big deal because they don't have any experience with the world outside the nest box. So this transition of fledging is a really difficult transition for young birds. The adults are what we call sexually dimorphic. And actually, even the older nestlings show this difference in appearance between the sexes. So even if you're very new to bird watching, you'll be able to identify the males from the females. The males have this blue coloration on their wings and the kind of rusty red back. They also have a dark tail band, which you can't really see in the picture, but it's really helpful if you're trying to identify the sex of the bird in flight. You'll see their tail feathers have a really thick black band. The females are this sort of dull brown color all over, and they have some tail bands too, but there are several kind of more faint tail bands compared to the male. One difference that isn't obvious at first sight is the size difference. So like many raptors, the females are larger than the males, and in kestrels, the females are about 10 to 15% larger. So this really piques my interest as a researcher, because if they're reaching different endpoints for maturation, they might have different developmental patterns as a nestling. So we'll come back to that a bit later. All right, so that's our basic breeding biology of kestrels. And now I'd like to talk about kestrel decline, which I alluded to earlier. So for the last few years, I've gotten to work closely with the Hawk Mountain Sanctuary, which has a long-term monitoring population that's been active for over 50 years. And they have over 100 nest boxes that they check every spring for nests from kestrels. And these are all around the surrounding area of Kempton. Nest boxes are located on agricultural areas, so that's the preferred habitat for kestrels. They especially like shortgrass pastures, so grazing areas are ideal, and they hunt many agricultural pests, so they're a really nice bird to have around. But one of the findings from Hawk Mountain's long-term monitoring has been a decline in the population. So this is a graph that's from John Smallwood's study in 2009. He looked at kestrel decline in different regions. And what we have on the y-axis here is the percent of the nest boxes that were monitored by researchers that were occupied, that were actually being used by kestrels. And then some different lines for different populations that have been monitored. So this Pennsylvania line here, this light gray one, is the Hawk Mountain sanctuary population. But you can see that there are other researchers all around North America that have also been monitoring kestrels. And there's some regional variation, but for the most part, it's a decline if we look at how percent occupancy is changing. So there are some speculated causes of decline. So one possibility is habitat loss. So loss of that short grass habitat that kestrels like. Could also be habitat loss from wintering grounds. Predation by Cooper's hawks, which are a larger raptor that in particular will hunt the younger fledgling kestrels that aren't that experienced. West Nile virus. So West Nile virus antibodies have been found in the blood of kestrels, so that's a possibility. Or low overwintering survival. So these are just some of Smallwood's ideas, but no one of these seems to be really clearly associated with the decline. So it's a bit of a mystery as to why this trend is occurring, and we really need more information to be able to figure out how to reverse this. So this is some of the data from the Hawk Mountain population, and this is going back to the 90s, and I want to show you some trends here. So clutch size is the number of eggs in the nest, and that is pretty stable. So on average, between 4 and 5 eggs, the kestrels are consistently laying that number of eggs in the nest. The nest failure rate is also pretty consistent. It's between 20 to 30% of nests that start out with eggs don't actually fledge chicks or have chicks that successfully survive to leave the nest. So these two metrics are really quite stable. But the occupancy, the percent of adults that are occupying those nest boxes, or the number of breeding pairs, is declining. So the nests are successfully laying eggs, and fledging chicks, the nest success rate is pretty consistent. But what's declining are the number of adults that are actually in the population. So that really makes me think about the quality of those chicks, because they aren't quite doing well enough to recruit into the breeding population and become adults. So something is happening in this sort of time period of their life cycle. So this is the life history pattern in birds, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And what I want to highlight are the transition periods. So key transition, hatching from an egg, okay? Fledging is another key transition. And we think of these as developmental milestones in biology. So I'm really interested in how a nestling prepares for the transition to fledging, leaving the nest. And they're really going from a sedentary lifestyle in the nest box to a highly active, really quite dangerous life outside of the nest box. How is a bird preparing for that transition? How are they allocating their resources and developing to prepare for that? And part of why I'm interested in this is because there's an exceptionally high mortality rate at the fledging transition. And this is true of many different species, not just kestrels. So I've got a whole list of studies here. These are the different bird species, the photographs of them that have been studied. So here's our species list. And what these studies did is they followed nestlings after they left the nest for some period of time, the post-fledging period. So it varied from just a few weeks to a couple of months that they've tracked these birds. And they found a pretty high mortality rate across the board. So 40 to 80% of fledglings are not surviving past their first month or two after leaving the nest. And this is pretty consistently high across species. The primary cause of mortality is often predation, if they're able to measure it. It's not always possible. And that's likely because these birds are really easy prey for predators. They're very inexperienced. They're not good flyers. So they're likely being just easy for predators to hunt them. So I'm interested in how the birds are preparing for this really dangerous time in their lives. So how do we study kestrels as researchers? I take the approach to studying birds that's laid out by life history theory. Life history theory is the theory that an organism's behavior, its morphology, the physical traits like its body size and shape, its physiology, the internal systems of the body, and its biochemistry. All four of these levels contribute to how an individual organism allocates resources for survival and reproduction, passing on its genes. So this is a really integrative way of looking at organisms that takes into account multiple levels of biology. And that means I get to do field work, lots of fun things like behavioral surveys, but also lab work measuring things like physiology, using samples that are collected in the field. And what this approach does is it ensures that we don't miss anything, that we're really assessing the whole organism, not just one aspect of their biology. And that's important for something like the kestrel, where there's really a lot of mystery around why they might be declining. We really need to look at the whole organism. So with the help of my field assistants and the Hawk Mountain Sanctuary, I monitored kestrel nests for 2 breeding seasons, 2018 and 2019. And we collected data on the date that the eggs were laid, the lay date, so that we can keep track of the timing of breeding, the number of eggs or the clutch size. And then we also assess the chick's development. So one way that I do that to measure chick physiology is to take a blood sample from the bird. And this allows us to measure 2 important components of chick health: hematocrit and hemoglobin concentration. And these are measurements that if you've ever had your blood drawn at a doctor's office, you've had these measurements done on you as well. So they indicate aerobic capacity of the individual. So how efficiently they transport oxygen in the blood. And this is especially important because the chicks are sedentary in the nest box. They're kind of like couch potatoes, and they have to be athletes when they leave the nest box with very little training or exercise. And both of these traits, hematocrit and hemoglobin concentration, are higher in athletic individuals. And that's true not just for birds, but for humans and other vertebrates, that these traits increase with training and exercise, which the nestlings don't get a lot of. So this tells us something about the bird's preparedness for this fledging transition. We also take some standard body size metrics, so the morphology of the chicks. So that includes body mass. And the way we do that is we have a little digital kitchen scale, and my field assistants often eat cereal in the field. So we had all of these empty cereal cups, and we use that to keep the bird on this scale when we take their mass. We also measure the tarsus. The tarsus is the length of the leg bone, and that gives us just an index of the size of the skeleton of the bird. And then a flattened wing cord, so that's measuring the longest feather on their wings. The last thing that we do is we measure the chick's diet, and we're trying to assess the microbiome as well using fecal samples. So the microbiome is the bacteria that are in the intestinal tract of the bird. We're able to measure the microbiome, what bacteria are in their guts, with lab work. And then we also have some videos that we take of the nest box. So this is a picture of what our video setup looks like. We've got a camera, a GoPro camera that's mounted to the outside of the nest box, so we can see the parents flying in and out to bring food, and that helps us assess the diet. We mount the camera to the outside of the nest box, You might have seen nest box cameras that are inside the box, but kestrels are known to poop directly on the lens of the camera if you put it inside the box. So we chose this position to try and avoid that so we can make sure we get good information from our film. So in order to track growth and development over the entire nestling period, we assess all of these things each week. So when the chicks were days 5 and 6 after hatching, we filmed the nest for at least an hour to observe feeding, see what kinds of foods the parents are bringing back to the nest. And then on the third day, day 7, we sample the chicks. We take all those measurements and samples. And we repeated this for a total of 3 weeks. So kestrels fledged within a week of their last measurement, usually around day 28. And we did this for 2 breeding seasons, so 2 years. So we have a lot of data on individual chicks and everything that's happening to them during these first 3 weeks of their life. So I want to show you a video of what some of our footage looks like from the nest cameras and see if you can identify, I'll make this just a little bit smaller. See if you can identify the type of prey that the chicks are being fed. So this is a male kestrel, and he's got a little cricket. This is a female kestrel, and she's got a mouse. You can see the long tail. The last one's really tricky. This is also a female kestrel. And it's pretty tough to identify what she's at. So I'm going to pause the video. Oh, that's not quite where I wanted to pause it. Let's see if I can get, here we go. That's the frame that I want. So if you look closely, you can see the prey item she has is pretty much the same size as her. And if you look closely, you can see there's a little bird foot that's coming off of this prey item. So her foot's on the box. So this is another bird. This kestrel has hunted an American robin. We did confirm this in the field. We found this. It's a decapitated robin. It looks like she ate part of it before bringing it to her chicks. And it's pretty impressive for a kestrel to hunt a bird that is pretty much the same size as them and be successful with that. Okay, so I had a lot of different research questions that we were trying to answer with all of this data, but I'm just going to tell you about these 3 so that I don't keep us here all night. So the first question that I had as a researcher was, how does nestling morphology and physiology change during development? So how are these kestrels preparing to leave the nest? Looking at both the morphology, their body size and shape, and the physiology, those internal systems of the body. And we'll focus on hematocrits to kind of keep things simple. The second question was, is nestling diet consistent across nests, or does it vary depending on which nest that we're looking at? So I just showed you a video of 3 nests. We had 3 very different prey items, an insect, a rodent, and a songbird prey item. So how variable is that across different nests, or is it pretty consistent? And then the third question, does diet correlate with some aspect of nesting quality or the quality of the chicks? So that kind of brings together these 2 questions to see if these 2 variables relate to each other. So let's tackle this first one. How does nestling morphology and physiology change during development? And I'm going to show you a graph. It's a little complicated, so I want to just orient you to the setup. So I'm going to have on the x-axis here the age of the bird. So when they're 7, 14, and 21 days old, we take a measurement on the same individual bird. And then on my y-axis, I have the mass of the bird. And I'm going to change that as we look at each different nestling quality metric. I'm going to have Different lines. There's actually going to be 58 lines on this graph, one for each individual bird. So you can really see how each of these birds is developing during the nestling period. And the females will be in gold and the males will be in green. Remember, in kestrels, females are about 10% larger than males as adults. And then I have some adult values are going to be horizontal dashed lines to just show you kind of the benchmark for where the parents would be relative to the chicks. So let's look at this first graph. Got a lot of lines here. So you can see how each individual chick's mass changed throughout the study. And the thing that jumps out at me right away is that the gold lines, the female chicks, are higher up than the male chicks. And that kind of makes sense because we know that the females are larger. On day 7, the males and females are actually not that different in size from each other. It's not significantly different between the sexes, but the females do grow faster. So by day 14 and 21, the females are larger than the males. So even when they're so young, there is this sexual dimorphism, this difference in the size. In general, chicks have a rapid increase in mass. They increase their mass by 80% in a week from day 7 to 14. And then after that, the mass change kind of levels off. So on average, there's a 9% increase here. A few chicks have a slight decrease, but they pretty much get to the adult level and then plateau in this second week. If we look at the wing length of the kestrels, we can see a pretty linear increase. So from day 7 to 14 to 21, there's very little variation. These lines are almost parallel. We don't see any sex differences in wing length. And everyone's kind of following a similar growth pattern. And that's true for the mass trait too. They're all kind of increasing and then plateauing. The wing length, they all increase at this similar rate. And we see something very different when we start to look at physiology. So I'm going to show you hematocrit, which remember is associated with ability to transport oxygen in the blood and athletic ability. And it's quite messy data. We get a whole lot of individual variation. So between day 7 and 14, half of the chicks increase in their hematocrit and get closer to the adult values, and then half of them actually decrease their hematocrit levels. So they're going away from the adult levels. Between day 14 and 21, it's a little more of a consistent increase, but it's still highly variable. So this is interesting because on average, the chicks do get closer to the adult levels by the time they're a late stage nestling, but by the time they're day 21. But the pathway to get there is just incredibly variable. And this is very different from those clear, distinct patterns, those nice, neat lines that we saw in the physical traits that we measured, morphology, mass, wing length, and then the tarsus length, the length of the leg bone. I haven't shown you, but that's very similar. So when we look at morphology, those physical traits on their body, we see really consistent patterns across individuals. There are some sex differences with the females developing more rapidly in body mass, but the physiological traits by comparison show a lot of individual variation. So my second question is looking at the diet of the nestlings and how variable or consistent that might be across different nests. So the nest showed some very different diets from one another. This data is taken from over 110 hours of video watched by my undergraduate assistants. And many of these hours of video were watched, and hundreds of different prey items were brought back to the nest. And the prey categories that we saw were songbirds, so like the American robin that we saw, small mammals like mice and voles, arthropods, which includes insects, but also things like spiders, earthworms, and the other category represents things that we only saw one time and didn't fall into the other categories. So we did see one frog, we saw a lizard, but things that are rarely observed and didn't fit into the other groups. But you can see that some nests had only one or two different prey types that were brought back to the chicks. And other nests had a lot of variation, had multiple categories of prey that we saw. And I should mention that we did a calculation of the average mass and the average size of each of these prey, and we corrected for that in the graph. So that's part of why the vertebrate prey items, the songbirds and the small mammals dominate, because one mouse is much larger than many crickets. So that's accounted for on here. So lots of variation in these nests showing different prey being fed to the chicks. So variable diet across nests. So is nestling diet consistent across nests? No, exclamation point. And these nestlings are really experiencing different conditions as they're developing, depending on what nest they're in, based on just looking at the diet differences. So this last question, does diet correlate with nestling quality, kind of brings these two things together. The quality of the chicks we measured with things like morphology and physiology, and then the diet. Is there some sort of consequence or correlation that goes with that diet and the quality of the nestlings? So we looked at wing length and the diet diversity. So nests that received a diet that had more diversity, more different prey types, actually had shorter wings than nests that had just one or two prey types in the diet. So that's kind of interesting. More diverse diets, shorter wings for the birds. It's important to mention here that correlation does not imply causation. So it's not necessarily true that a more diverse diet is bad for kestrel chicks. It could indicate that the parents are not in a high quality habitat, or that there's some other factor that relates to diet diversity that we haven't accounted for. But what we can do is we can predict that if a nest has a lot of diversity in the diet brought to the chicks, that we're going to see shorter wings in those chicks. And then we also looked at the effect on the other traits that I mentioned, body mass and hematocrits. We didn't see an effect there, only when we looked at wing length. So does diet correlate with nestling quality? Yes, the nestlings had shorter wings if they had a more diverse diet. All right, so I want to wrap up with some ideas about how you can get involved in helping birds like the kestrel. Lots of different species are experiencing decline, not just kestrels. So I'll talk about how you can be involved in avian conservation. So the first, most obvious thing is to set up a nest box. And I would love for you to set up a kestrel nest box. So there's a lot of information on Hawk Mountain's website, hawkmountain.org, about plans for what the size of the kestrel nest box should be, where you should put it. But as we saw, they prefer open habitat, fields and pastures. Kestrels need a lot of space to raise a nest of young. They need a lot of resources. So kestrel nest boxes should be at least half a mile apart and 10 to 30 feet up. So they like a high nest box. You may not have exactly the right habitat to put a kestrel nest box. So if that's the case, I want to encourage you to set up a nest box For other cavity nesting birds, so remember cavity nesting birds, birds that really depend on having an enclosed space to build their nest. They aren't able to just lay those eggs anywhere. So there are lots of other cavity nesting birds in Pennsylvania. So house wrens, this is a house wren down here, black-capped chickadees. Both of these two species prefer more forested habitat. So if you have space like that in your yard, you can set up boxes for these species. Eastern bluebirds, which you can see here, they're a beautiful bird. They actually like the same habitat as kestrels. So if you set up a kestrel nest box, you can put a bluebird box nearby too. They don't need quite as much space for their territory to raise offspring. Tree swallows also like that open field habitat, like parks and pastures. Northern flickers, woodpecker, and then screech owls. Sometimes we get screech owls in kestrel nest boxes. So even if you don't have the right habitat for a kestrel in your backyard, you can set up nest boxes for other native species. And some of these birds are really good prey for kestrels. So having a healthy population of some of these smaller birds in particular can be good for kestrels too. The Pennsylvania Game Commission has plans on their website for all these different species nest boxes. They also sell nest box kits if you want to build a nest box, or they sell pre-assembled boxes, but it's pretty fun to put it together. And they're like $10 or something. So it's a really nice activity you can do to kind of help out birds. Another thing you can do is to plant native plants. So I really encourage, regardless of the size of the outdoor space you have, to plant native plants. If you have invasive plants in your yard, research shows you'll have fewer native insects, and those native insects attract native birds. So prioritizing plants that are native to your region means you will support the native insect population, good insects like bees and butterflies, and that will attract native birds to your yard. And this is true even if you have a small yard space, even if it's a balcony in an apartment building, planting native plants there provides really good habitat for wildlife. I've got a couple of books here. These are by Professor Doug Ptolemy, who is an entomologist at the University of Delaware. He's written Bringing Nature Home, I think was his first book. And in his more recent book, Nature's Best Hope, a new approach to conservation that starts in your yard. And these are really good guidebooks about how to create a healthy habitat for birds and other wildlife in your yard. All right, the last thing is to get involved in citizen science. So citizen science allows you to directly help scientists learn about wild birds and other wildlife, and you can make a real significant contribution to conservation science this way. So Project Feeder Watch is a citizen science project that's run out of the Cornell University's Lab of Ornithology. And this takes place in the winter, so this is the right time to get involved in Project Feeder Watch. You collect data at your home bird feeder about what species are there and how many birds you see at the bird feeder, and then you send that data in, and it's used by scientists to look at long-term trends in bird populations. And the second one here is Project Nest Watch, and this takes place more in the spring and summer. This is where you monitor birds' nests, either in your nest box, if you have one, or nests that you find in your yard or at local parks. And you record the information about the eggs in the nest, what stage the nest is in, if there are chicks, what species is using that nest. And that is also used by scientists to do breeding studies. This last one here is zooniverse.org. Zooniverse is something I discovered very recently, so I'm really excited about it. This is an entirely online platform for citizen science, and there are many different projects on Zooniverse. It's totally free, And what you do is collect all kinds of data. So there are lots of different categories of projects. A common one is to have you transcribe handwritten records. So that's what this picture is of. This is a record of a bluebird nest that someone monitored years ago, and they have this handwritten accounts, but it needs to be digitized. So actually taking that information from photos of records and putting it in digital format. There are a lot of projects that are through museums where you're using historical data to transcribe that information that can be stored more easily. Some of them you're looking at photos of different specimens and making different measurements. And then the last kind of category of biology projects on Zooniverse are using trail cameras to look at wildlife. And a lot of times these aren't birds, but you get to see other cool wildlife. And this is a picture from a study in Michigan. And they upload all of these photos from trail cameras, and they need people to help look at all the photos and identify what animals are there. So you can log on right now and help scientists identify different wildlife in photos. So those are some ways that you can get involved in Kestrel research. And with that, I think I just want to thank you all for listening. And I want to thank all the people who have contributed to the work that I told you about today. So my funding sources, the Nuttall Ornithological Club. I want to thank my field assistants. I worked with really fabulous undergraduate students and Hawk Mountain trainees, Hawk Mountain Sanctuary itself, all my collaborators, and I hope I'm not missing anyone in that. But I'm happy to take any questions.
Allison, thank you so much. That was fantastic. So interesting. And I love seeing the videos. So we have several questions that have come in. So let's get started with the questions. Did you collect the hematocrits from the same area of kestrels? And were the hematocrits collected when the birds had completed flying or resting?
Oh, interesting. Okay, so for the second part of that question, was hematocrit collected when they were flying or resting? So all of these, all the data that I showed, we just took the chicks out of the nest box for their quick measurements and then put them back in. So these are all birds that had never been out of the nest box or had never flown before. And then what was the first part of the question?
Did you collect the hematocrits from the same area of kestrels?
Yeah. So the same region, the boxes around Kempton, PA, that are usually monitored by the Hawk Mountain Sanctuary. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Oh my gosh, so many questions are coming in. Okay. Did nestlings that were fed rodents and or birds exclusively have longer wings, and were they more robust at fledgling?
That is a great question. I'm going to look at my graph. So we only had one nest that was only fed the small mammals. And I should mention, it was only fed the small mammals for the 6 to 10 hours that we were watching it. Okay, so this is an index. We don't know everything that they ate. So it's hard to say. But if they received fewer differences or lower diversity in the diet, they would have had the longer wings. But we didn't see in particular that one prey type, like having specifically songbird prey or having specifically rodent prey, was preferable or better for the chicks. I hope that answers the question. Were there other components to that?
I think that you hit those two main points there. So thank you. I'm overwhelmed by the questions coming in. This is
Okay.
Do males fledge at a younger age than the females?
I don't think so.
All right, that was a quick response.
Yeah.
Okay. Does other data such as the CBC, BBS, et cetera, also show kestrel population declines?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yes, there are other data sets besides just the nest box monitoring program. So that graph was just looking at breeding season data, the percent occupancy in the nest box, but there are other counts like migration counts that also show kestrel decline. Yeah, good question.
And also on the topic of decline, is the general decline in kestrel numbers believed to be equal for both genders?
Oh, I don't know. That's interesting. I think that there is a migration data set somewhere that showed more males than females, but that might just be differences in migratory behavior between the males and females.
And the person that
That's
asked,
a great idea. Yeah.
and kind of like a follow-up, that person, Kirk, who asked that question, also commented that twice in recent years he's had females hang out around nest boxes in the spring for about a week and then disappear, and he's wondered if they were just unable to find mates. So that kind of spurred the question.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. It's possible. Usually, though, in a socially monogamous breeding system, which is what kestrels have, they can at least get a really high quality male to fertilize eggs. But that would be hard to raise kestrel chicks as a single parent. So that's an interesting observation.
All right, so we have a few questions coming in about the correlation between wing length and diversity of prey items being fed. So I'll kind of try to combine those two questions. You mentioned that the diverse diet results in shorter wings. Is this a positive or is this a negative? And do you have an idea about why this correlation exists?
So I would think it's negative because a longer wing, if we look at the wing data, chicks don't get to adult levels by day 21. Now they keep growing, they don't fledge till day 28. So they might get there by the day that they actually leave the nest. But I would think that, being farther away from the adult levels is a negative thing. And the other question was why this is. Yeah. I actually suspect that it's that diet diversity just indicates that it's a lower quality territory, lower quality habitat. Maybe they're having trouble finding, there isn't a lot of abundant prey, so they have to kind of take what's there. But that's really speculation. I don't have data to support that sort of guess.
Well, I think that your speculation is certainly a valued speculation. So we have some questions coming in about the invasive species that can outcompete kestrels for cavity nesting spaces. What are some of those species that are the biggest competition for kestrel nesting cavities?
So kestrels are pretty tough. So house sparrows certainly outcompete things like, bluebirds or wrens, but kestrels can outcompete a house sparrow. They will eat a house sparrow. I've seen dead house sparrows in kestrel nest boxes. I think probably the most likely thing to outcompete a kestrel would be a starling, and not because the starling can win in a fight against a kestrel, but starlings are known to do things like sabotage nests. They might go in and crack eggs. I have seen starlings lay there just once. I've seen this. I've seen a starling lay its egg, had a starling egg in a kestrel nest, and that nest never survived. I don't know if the starling played a role or not. So it could be that starlings interfere, but kestrels are pretty tough. So
awesome. Okay, so is there any difference in mortality or nesting quality in natural cavities versus nest boxes?
That is a great question, and I want Hawk Mountain to do that study sometime. To do that, we have to go and find the natural cavities, and they're really hard to find. So, yeah, if you have a natural cavity nest, actually, even if it's in a barn or something, but it's not in a nest box, you should probably let Hawk Mountain know if you're in the Kempton area, and they might be able to monitor that and start to answer that question.
Yeah, thanks, Allison. And that reminds me of another point that I wanted to share with the audience. I shared it in the chat during your program when you were talking about citizen science projects. Hawk Mountain also is very involved. We have citizen science projects that you can access from our website. We have our farmland raptors project, and the kestrel is a key species there. And we have, if you search on our website, farmland raptors or raptor sightings, you can report what different raptor species you're seeing, and particularly kestrel is all raptors are very important to us, and especially the kestrel we're very interested to know. So that's a great way that anyone who sees a raptor or a kestrel, you know, in the wild on their own can contribute to important scientific data just from our website as well. Okay,
yeah,
so
this is a great time to get involved in citizen science because can't do that. We can't really go anywhere with COVID. So doing citizen science where you're outdoors, you can be socially distant, where you can do Zooniverse projects or things where it's online, really good use of your time during COVID.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. We also sell kestrel nest boxes in our bookstore. Okay, we
Buy
have
them from Hawk Mountain then.
yes, yes. So we have some more questions coming in. There was a question, let's see, where did it go? About can you put on the same pole a kestrel nest box and a bluebird box? Is it possible to put a kestrel box at 30 foot and a bluebird box lower on the same pole?
You could, yeah. So a bluebird box you can put closer to breast height. I have heard stories of kestrels then hunting the bluebirds if the bluebird box is very nearby, but that's how nature works. So if you want to do that, I would say go for it.
Okay, thank you. And a question just popped in about when we were talking about the citizen science and reporting raptor sightings. Is there a portable app that people can use on their phone besides eBird to report raptor sightings?
Oh, I was going to say eBird. I think eBird's the best one.
Okay, okay. Okay, now we have a question about banding. So this is from Gene. He says, I assume you all banned all the nestlings, but are you all catching the adults in the box to ban them or see if they are banded? And he is banding wintering kestrels in Maryland that leave here during the spring.
Oh, cool. Yeah, so we do band all of the nestlings. The adults, we don't trap in the box. We have been trapping them outside the box, which takes a long time, is labor intensive. And so we have banded some adults. I think Hawk Mountain is planning to kind of ramp that up and do more adult banding. And gosh, does that answer the question? That's great that you're banding in Maryland. We should talk. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. That's why I love how these virtual programs can connect so many different people with common passions and interests. Okay, we have a question from Allison. What are your ideas, Dr. Cornell, about why kestrels are declining? I know you mentioned there's some theories and there's some unknowns, and I kind of want to add on to Allison's question. I didn't see pesticides or insecticides on that list of theories, and I was just wondering, that's not a concern.
Pesticides are a concern. I probably should have put them on the slide. So that's a good thought. That's another thing that, you know, Hawk Mountain is ramping up research to look into that more. I really am stumped by kestrel decline. I don't know, and a lot of people are stumped. I think that looking at nestling quality is a start, and you know, if we could follow kestrels better at other stages during wintering and post-fledging, we might be able to untangle some things. But it's probably a combination of all of these things together, rather than just one individual cause. But it's a big challenge, and lots of people are stumped by this.
Yeah. Thanks, Allison. It's a huge challenge. And I know, when Hawk Mountain said 2020, the year of the Kestrel, we recently received some generous funding to kind of increase and expand our Kestrel research as well. So we all are working together to try to solve these mysteries and protect these awesome birds. And you had just mentioned wintering grounds, Allison, and we had a question about migration. And at Hawk Mountain, we love questions about migration. So do kestrels stay in one area year long? Do they migrate during the colder months, or a mix of both?
So if we look at the map that I had way at the beginning, they are found in Pennsylvania year round. So the purple areas are where you can find them. That doesn't necessarily mean that the same one that breeds here in Pennsylvania is here in the winter. So it could be that they're kind of scooting down to say the southern US, and then these the sort of rusty color up here are where they will breed, but not winter. So it could be that these ones from Canada are coming down to winter in Pennsylvania. Can't really tell unless we do what Jean was talking about and band the adults and then do trapping in the winter, which we can do. It's labor intensive. And maybe that's something that Hawk Mountain will be doing. But you can find them year round in all the purple areas on the map.
Right. Thank you so much. And a final question, are squirrels ever a threat to kestrel nest boxes?
That's a great question. We have had squirrels in the nest boxes where we've gone to check the nest box and bam, there's a squirrel there. I wouldn't think that they're a threat just because I've seen kestrels bring, I guess not adult squirrels, but we have on camera them hunting the young squirrels and bringing young squirrels back to the nest to feed their nestlings. So I think probably not, but there are lots of squirrels that use nest boxes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And that wraps up our questions. What fantastic questions. That was great.
Thank you all.
Allison, thank you so much for such an amazing presentation. It was so interesting. Thank you. And folks in the audience are commenting in the chat. Good job. Thank you to our wonderful audience for joining us this evening. We love to connect with you virtually, if not in person. So thank you. Thank you. We hope to see you at Hawk Mountain sometime. We are open. Check out our website for our modifications for health and safety surrounding COVID-19. I'd love to share with you some of our upcoming programs that we have. We hope everyone has a fantastic Thanksgiving. And Friday, Black Friday, November 27th, we have an opt-outside hike, our River of Rocks Trail from 10 to 2. So join us for that and work off that Thanksgiving meal. Let's see, we have on Saturday, December 5th, our Winter Artisan Series with the Arts Barn Wire Christmas Tree Workshop at 1. On Sunday, December 13th, we have our Christmas bird count for kids, and that is at 10 o'clock a.m. And then on Tuesday and Wednesday, December 15th and 16th, we have our homeschool happening program, Arctic Animals, and that is from 10 a.m. to noon. And then on Thursday, December 17th, we have Sanctuary Storytime at 11 a.m. Copy Me, Copy Cub, all about bears getting ready for hibernation. And finally, on Saturday, December 19th, we have our winter celebration and ugly sweater hike at 10 o'clock. So we hope to see you. Thanks so much for joining us and have a wonderful evening. Bye for now.
Thank you all.